The Batman is an injection shot right into the veins of the comic book genre. A genre that quite frankly has been teetering towards a particular type of film. This film right here transcends the genre like no other film in its past has. Matt Reeves had a particular style that he was going with, and he nailed it. Everything that he promised, he delivered on and then some. What really impressed me is, well aware of what type of director Reeves is and how great he is. You've seen his 8 movies, Let Me In, Cloverfield. He can direct and write, but it's the creative decisions in this film that really stand out for me. Certain aspects about Batman, certain aspects with sound, everything put in together in this nice pot to make something quite amazing. This film right here is spectacular. And I have to tackle first the title character, the Batman. I loved him. Absolutely love him. Robert Pattinson nailed this character. This film to me was an origin story, but not for Bruce Wayne, but for the Batman as a character himself. He's not a persona. He's not just a costume that you put on. The Batman is a character. And this is his origin story, and I loved that take of it. Robert Pattinson in all his previous films, a majority of them. And it's weird. Let me stop before I go any further, because I've been hearing about, you got Twilight Boy being Batman, and he can't do it, this and the third. I find it weird how so many people who don't watch or haven't watched Twilight have so much to say about him playing Twilight. Okay, enough said. Anyways, back to Rob as Batman himself. He nailed it. All his previous roles, he plays them with this intensity, and it's here as well. But the difference is these other roles, he knows how to dial it down, and up here it stays consistent from start to the end. And by doing that, it adds this intimidation factor like no other Batman that I've seen. Don't get me wrong, Ben Affleck is definitely the most intimidating structure-wise, but this Batman right here, boy, talk about intimidation. The way he carries himself, his mannerisms, he walks a particular way, he slowly turns, he looks at you, all in a way to just strike fear into you. It's extremely calculated and precise on how he does what he does as Batman. Man, and when you're first introduced to him, it's this fun little technique that I don't consider this a spoiler, but before you're introduced to him, you hear his footsteps. And that, to me, does more to scare a villain than a smoke grenade, battering. Just hearing something as simple as a footsteps that you don't know where it's coming from reminds me of something that you'll see in a horror movie. And this is what this character was. Rob he nailed it. And another aspect that really makes this film great is every single character, and I mean every single character, was amazing. The Riddler, Penguin, James Gordon, Catwoman, Alfred, Falcone, all were amazing. And I know you hear this a lot in other movies. They're talking about, this character. I legit cannot pick one bad performance from here. Mind-boggling in my opinion. But I want to spotlight on Catwoman for a while, because we've seen different versions of Catwoman in the past. Michelle Pfeiffer, Anne Hathaway. But they're pretty much played the same. Conniving, evil, untrustworthy. But this Catwoman, Reeves and the team and Zoe Kravitz, they brought this humanity to this character, the vulnerability, this sweet aspect to a character that's not typically portrayed in that aspect, but still being the Catwoman that we loved and seen. And she has an amazing, absolutely amazing character arc. Man, I I can't. With that being said, I don't even know if she's my favorite character or if it's Penguin, Colin Farrell. You don't recognize Colin Farrell, and it's not even just the prosthetics that he got on, the voice that he used. Oh my god, his mannerisms with Penguin. This is the Penguin I envision when I see Penguin, not all the other ones that we've seen in the past. This right here is spectacular, man. And Alfred, Andy Serkis, he's not in the film as much, which we've been warned about, but the small amounts that he had was so powerful, and it took me off guard a little bit, because when you're first introduced with not even when you're first, just throughout the film, the interaction with Bruce Wayne and Alfred is particular shown in a certain light. In this film, it was pretty non-existent. The way they interact with each other is not what you expect until something happens, and then you start seeing, okay, these are the comic book counterparts that I'm typically, known to seeing, and I see where they're headed. So at first it was a little off-putting, but where it ended up going, yeah. But oh man, I was surprised at how much James Gordon we got in this film. And that was that was a big feat, because Gary Oldman is my favorite James Gordon. But Jeffrey Wright, man, he easily probably had the most to do out of any Gordon in the past, and he absolutely nailed it. The dynamic between him and Batman felt so right and so on the nose comic book wise. From the minute you're introduced to these characters, you're like, okay, you could tell these are old, like they felt like old buddies and stuff like that. I love that aspect. James Gordon was fantastic. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm not going to break down every character from this film because we'll be here all day, but there's something that's really been bugging me after watching the film and seeing a couple reviews beforehand. The lack of praise Paul Dano's Riddler has been getting. In a genre that a lot of these villains are paper thin motives, weak backstories, to have such a compelling character like this Riddler, and the way they portrayed, like, these characters, all of Batman villains, they're psychopaths and legit serial killers. If you were to bring them into the real world, these are your typical serial killers that you would hear about. But because of the comic books, they portray it in a fun aspect. But here, all of that is stripped. You're introduced to this psychopath who's not all right in the head, but extremely, extremely intelligent. Paul Dano's performance, the way he turns it on and turns it off in the blink of an eye, it needs to be praised. Absolutely needs to be praised. And the groundedness of this film, the previous trilogy, Nolan's, is probably one of the most grounded portrayals of any comic book character you could get. And this one just it takes it there. It really takes it there. It felt so real. Like, I've heard complaints of how Batman feels just like a normal guy with a costume on. And that right there is what makes it so scary. It makes it believable. Like, anybody with $1 billion could do this. And yeah. Like, there's this one scene, the chase scene with him and Penguin. How that's dealt felt so real. It's a chase scene that's happening in the highway, which you see, but it feels like I could easily go on a highway right now and see a high-speed chase like that done in the real world. There was no, and I mean no, comic book aspects, no high fantasy. It's extremely stylistic. I can't praise this enough, man. I can't praise this enough. And speaking on keeping things grounded, Gotham this time was a legit character. And I know you've probably heard that from numerous other reviewers, I'm not sure. But this is definitely the case in this film. And what I mean by a character this time, in a lot of these other films, you just hear of how bad Gotham is. It's the slums. It's this and the third. But in the Nolan's trilogy, Batman Begins, yeah, Gotham looks pretty bad. But from The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, it looks like Metropolis. Huge skyscrapers, billionaires having dinner in fancy restaurants and stuff like that. You never really felt that sense of danger, that grime, that grit. But this film, it's all realized. From the opening sequences, you understand what type of Gotham you're dealing with. And this is probably one of the first times it felt like Batman was losing or was fighting a losing battle and trying to save Gotham. And it's not just the look of Gotham itself, the aesthetics, it's the people. These are very, very bad and screwed up people, to the point that you're honestly thinking, are they even worth saving? They really hammer home of how bad of a place and situation Gotham is. And to see this Batman dealing with that aspect, him still trying to save Gotham, that's inspiring. And talk about inspiring, man. I'll let you watch the film to figure that all out by yourself. And the final thing, or one of the final things I want to say, is the detective aspect. We've honestly never ever got a true legit detective story, or Batman just being a detective. And it's a lot more than just like, oh God, he's solving this clue, he's doing this and that. It's how he does it. You watch these detective shows and movies and stuff, and you see a detective, they're observing the scene, clues and stuff like that. This is exactly what he's doing. He's in the scene of a crime and he's observing. He's picking up every aspect there, and then obviously he goes on to solving the clue. It's just, I have little to no complaints about this film. I do have some small gripes that I could bring, and it'll come off as nitpicking. But the real main issue I have was kind of, let me not say resolved at the end, but I see why it was done the way it was done, and I could see in future films it being a correction, like this was done purposely. And another thing that I was worried about coming into this film, it's a gripe I have with The Dark Knight. A lot of Batman's villains are brains over bronze. They're not Bane. They're not Deathstroke. They're not, physical counterparts. They're destroy your world by your brains, and that typically leads to a third act because the third act is the climax of the film, and that's when you're supposed to be, all the action scenes are supposed to be there. But when you have characters that are not physically, well off, how do you handle that? And I felt like that was one of the weak points in The Dark Knight. Physically making Joker and Batman fight, it didn't work out that well to me. And also, I was not looking for a physical, interaction with a Riddler and Batman, because it doesn't really make sense. But what they decide to do with it, brilliant writing. Love that third act. I heard some people say this was a weak third act. Okay, I'll leave it at that. But yeah, that was my review of the Batman. I'm sorry if I wasn't bringing up any negatives, because I didn't feel like my negatives were just. And I'm gonna watch this film like 2-3 more times, and maybe I'll bring up some negatives. But if you want a full spoiler discussion, check out the film wrap up with me and my boy, the rap nerd Jay. So check out his YouTube channel. That's my guy right there. But on the podcast we do spoiler reviews of all these big name films that get released. So expect one for the Batman to come out soon. So give that a listen when it does. And yeah, that was my review, and I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, man, I'm out. Peace.